Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining me. Um, I apologize for being late today, but it was for a good reason. So, I have a new potential case um to bring you guys, which I'm so excited for. Um, I really feel that this case um could be a good could be a good case for us to cover. There's a lot of twists, there's a lot of turns, there's a lot of finger pointing, and there's not a lot of evidence. And well, if we can't tell by the Melody Ferris case, I like cases that are a little on the more difficult side to really determine who's telling the truth and who's lying. Um, so to give you guys a little bit of background about this case that I am looking into, um, the case takes place in Virginia. Um, but what makes it so intriguing is it is a young girl who went to boarding school in the UK, um, where she happened to meet a guy named Jens Soering. Um, and Jens and Elizabeth Haysom, which is the young girl, meet. They fall madly in love. And Elizabeth starts with these, I don't want to say outlandish tales, um, but they're definitely more severe abuse tales. She starts writing him letters saying how she wants her parents dead and how her mother was sexually assaulting her. Um, and it's a lot. Um, and Jens feels the need to come running to her rescue. And in the letters, they talk about these dinner plans, um, and how Jens has it all planned out, um, and how the murder's going to look, and that, he's going to take care of her parents for her. And just, it's so bizarre. The fact that they just kind of laid out their plans fairly clearly in these letters back and forth to each other. Um, and in these trials, the two of them, between Elizabeth Haysom and Jens Soering, like, they just are back and forth with each other the whole time. They're both telling stories that are similar to each other for one of their two trials. And then all of a sudden, Jens turns around during his trial and states that everything that he said during Elizabeth's trial was a lie. And every single time that it looks like Jens may get away with this murder, there is something that makes them question if he is actually innocent or not. It is just um, an intriguing case. And I want to look more into it because, I mean, who doesn't want something that has a lack of evidence? And even in the Netflix documentary, Jan Solring says something that to me is very telling. And while it's not a confession of guilt, the way he phrases it just makes you sit back and really think like, did he or could he possibly have committed this crime? Um, you know, I understand that in the US you are innocent until proven guilty, but a court of law said that he was guilty. Same thing with Elizabeth Haysom. But I do find it really interesting that as soon as something seems to go in Jens's favor, they find something else out. Like at one point, they were looking into the possibility that Jens wasn't the person who murdered Haysom's parents. And they sat here and figured out that it wasn't two separate DNA samples, but that most of the DNA samples must have come from Derek Haysom and were contaminated with somebody else's blood. Like, what? It's absolutely insane. Um, and Yen says in the Netflix documentary that law enforcement wouldn't have had any um any evidence to convict him or Elizabeth Haysom had he not given a false confession back in 1986. And it's really telling to me that Jens has been screaming from the rooftop that he is innocent, and he's pointing fingers at somebody who um he's pointing fingers at people who were convicted or well jailed in 1985 for similar murders, and so these people were supposed to be in jail at that time. um And he's been screaming from the rooftops of how innocent he is, while Elizabeth Haysom, this entire time, has maintained that Jens helped her murder her parents, that he is just as guilty as she is, and that um, she and him were exactly where they deserved to be, which was in prison for this. Um, and Jens, this entire time, has been scheming on ways to get extradited back to Germany, where he would be seen as having spent his time in jail because a life sentence there is roughly 10 years. So to me it just seems very, very telling um as far as where his mindset was versus Elizabeth's. um and it kind of shows a lack of accountability because there's no proof that he did this, but there's really no proof that he didn't do this. And like the letters really count against him on this because I mean, he was very, um, very blatant about what he planned on doing, um, in these letters back and forth. I feel that the letters were one of the most telling things. And Elizabeth never really tried to downplay her part in a lot of this either. Um, and one of the key pieces of evidence towards Jens's innocence were movie tickets. But just because he bought movie tickets that day didn't mean that he saw them that day. He could have watched those movies before or after the murder so that he knew what happened. Um, so yeah, it's a very intriguing case. I do have a video queued up that kind of gives a brief overview that I really want to go over before we get back into day 3. Sadly, day 3 of the Melody Ferris trial is a lot of forensics. And I can't really talk much to what the forensics show because I'm not a forensic expert. Um, but I do stop and try to interject as much as I can, um, because I know that this is a very weighty part of the trial and it's very dry and it's very lengthy. Um, so I will interject to make things as easy as possible. Um, but let's get into this Haysom case a little bit and let me know if you guys think that it is something that you want to see me cover, because I feel that this case has a lot to offer, a lot to talk about, um, especially from like a psychology standpoint, a mental health standpoint. Now, while I'm not a mental health professional, I do enjoy getting into the mental health aspect of it. I am also working on getting certified as a certified peer specialist. Um, and so I do have some connection to psychology outside of my own mental health experiences, um, and life experiences that I've had with others who have mental health issues. Um, but without further ado, let's learn some more about the Haysom case. Now, keep in mind again, this is not going to be an extensive overview, but it is just long enough to kind of pique your guys' interest. So without further ado, let's watch Dr. Todd Grande, Grande, sorry, with talks of the false confessions, um, through the Jan Soring and Elizabeth Haysom case.
Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today's question is, can I analyze the case of Jens Soring and Elizabeth Haysom? Just a reminder, I'm not diagnosing anybody in this video, only speculating about what could be happening in a situation like this. If you enjoyed this video, please like it, subscribe to my channel, and consider supporting me on Patreon. I will put the link to Patreon in the description for this video. First, I'll look at the background of this case. I'll move to the timeline of the crime, then offer my analysis. Jens Soring was born in Thailand in 1966. His father was a mid-level German diplomat. His parents moved to Cyprus a year after he was born and spent 5 years there. Then they moved to Germany. At age 11, his family moved to Detroit, Michigan. Jens was academically gifted. In 1984, he was admitted to the University of Virginia on a full scholarship. This same year, he met a 20-year-old Canadian citizen and fellow student named Elizabeth Haysom.
Attention all internet users. Stop seeing ads for free when you can get paid to see them. Do you know how much of the content you see on a day?
She was the daughter of 2 wealthy Canadian parents, Derek and Nancy, who lived in a neighborhood called Loose Chippings in Boonesboro, Virginia, near Lynchburg. Derek was a retired steel executive. Nancy, who was about 19 years younger than her husband, was a socialite and a relative of Nancy Astor, otherwise known as Lady Astor. Elizabeth had some trouble with her behavior growing up. Her parents sent her to boarding school in England, but she ran away and traveled around Europe for 5 months. She engaged in a good deal of sexual activity and used a lot of drugs. Her parents eventually convinced her to come back to the United States, and Elizabeth enrolled at the University of Virginia. Elizabeth told Jens that her parents were horrible and manipulative. Her father mistreated her, and her mother disrespected her father. Derek and Nancy were not fans of Jens. They didn't think he was appropriate for their daughter and pressured Elizabeth to get rid of him. This only strengthened the resolve of Elizabeth and Jens. The couple wrote letters to one another. They were highly philosophical at times. They talked about how they were both very intelligent and they had a shared destiny. Their superiority allowed them to disregard morality. The couple started to invest in this idea of murdering Derek and Nancy. According to Jens, some of the early ideas included building a radio-controlled car bomb, sabotaging the brakes of their vehicles, and setting their house on fire. At first it was like a game, but then the discussions became serious. Eventually, Elizabeth and Jens developed a plan they could agree on. Now moving to the timeline of the crime. On March 30, 1985, Jens and Elizabeth rented a car and drove from Charlottesville, Virginia to Washington, D.C. The college campus was in Charlottesville. They checked into a Marriott hotel. Elizabeth purchased 2 movie tickets and room service for 2 people. She signed the name of her boyfriend on the receipt, and she made telephone calls, during which she pretended to be talking to Jens. As this was going on, Jens drove the rental car to the home of Elizabeth's parents in Boonesboro, Virginia. This is a distance of about 188 miles. It takes about 4 hours to drive. Derek and Nancy were surprised to see Jens. He had never visited the house before. They let him in and prepared a place at the table so he could eat. According to Jens, the Haysums were drinking, and he had a few drinks as well. He needed the courage. The encounter was initially peaceful, but then turned into a screaming match. Jens stabbed Derek with a knife 36 times and cut his throat. Derek was nearly decapitated. Jens then turned his attention to Nancy, stabbing her 6 times and cutting her throat. Jens sustained an injury to his left hand during the murders. Jens removed all of his clothing, which was bloody, and placed them in a garbage bag. He attempted to clean up the crime scene. Some of the blood he just smeared around in order to hide fingerprints. After walking out of the front door, he realized the front porch light was still on and walked back in the house. But he couldn't find the switch as it was located in the master bedroom. At some point, he put the garbage bag full of his clothing in a dumpster. Jens drove back to Washington, D.C. 3 days later, on April 3, the bodies of Derek and Nancy were discovered by a family friend. The police were notified. They noticed that there was no sign of forced entry, nothing had been stolen, and no assault of a sexual nature had taken place. They could not find any fingerprints other than from people who would normally have been at the house. But they did find a bloody sock print in the house and bloody footprints on the driveway. None of the prints were high quality enough to facilitate an identification. Initially, Elizabeth and Jens were not suspects, but then the police learned about how Elizabeth had rebelled against her parents. During an interview of Elizabeth, the police found her behavior to be strange. A witness at a reception after the Haysums' funeral noticed that Jens had bandages on his fingers and a bruise on his face. The police checked into the alibi of Elizabeth and Jens. They found it peculiar that the rental car records indicated the vehicle had been driven 669 miles. Charlottesville is only about 116 miles from Washington, D.C., so the round trip should have been about 232 miles. The couple explained the additional miles by saying they kept getting lost. I guess they made a wrong turn, or a couple of hundred wrong turns. They would have people believe they were driving lost for over 8 hours at highway speeds. The rental car was examined, but no useful physical evidence was found in the vehicle. Over time, the police eliminated every other suspect. They kept coming back to the idea that Elizabeth and her boyfriend were involved. The couple did not change their story. they said they were in Washington, D.C., in that hotel. After one interview, the police asked Jens for samples of his blood, fingerprints, and footprints. His response to this request made him look guilty. On October 13, he wiped all the fingerprints from his vehicle and apartment, emptied his bank accounts, and fled the country. Elizabeth was not far behind him. They traveled around Asia and Europe for several months, committing low-level crimes and taking various jobs. On April 30, 1986, the couple was arrested for fraud in London, but the authorities didn't know that they were wanted for murder because they were using aliases. The police asked Jens where he lived, and for some reason, he told them. After conducting a search of the apartment, the police found a German passport belonging to Jens and a travel diary. It contained what appeared to be references to an unspecified violent crime and statements that made it seem like the couple was trying to evade the authorities. When confronted with this information, Jens confessed to the murders. He supplied details that only the killer could have known, but other parts of his confession were inconsistent with the crime scene. Like he said that Nancy was wearing jeans when she was actually wearing a housecoat. He claimed that he did not plan to kill the Haysums, rather he killed them due to his consumption of alcohol and extreme emotions. He was disoriented and confused. He didn't know what he was doing. He admitted that he cut their throats, but said that another unknown assailant must have stabbed them. Jens and Elizabeth were both indicted for the murders. In 1987, Elizabeth pleaded guilty to 2 counts of accessory to murder before the fact, and was sentenced to 45 years in prison on each count to be served consecutively. Jens decided to fight extradition to the United States. In 1989, he was victorious. He could not be extradited if Virginia planned on executing him. Soring versus the United Kingdom became a landmark case. Virginia promised they would not seek the death penalty, which led to his extradition. In 1990, Jens was tried in Virginia for 2 counts of first-degree murder. He testified that Elizabeth was actually the killer. He had falsely confessed to the crime when in the United Kingdom. He was simply trying to protect her from the death penalty. He thought that he would be convicted in Germany and get a light sentence, which would not be uncommon there. Then he would move back to the United States and reunite with Elizabeth. The jury only needed a few hours to convict Jens. He was given 2 consecutive life sentences with the possibility of parole. In 2019, both Elizabeth and Jens were granted parole. Elizabeth was deported to Canada, and Jens was deported to Germany. Now moving to my analysis. Jens has been described as argumentative, immature, gullible, sexually inexperienced, arrogant, and manipulative. He has above-average intelligence and no history of mental health symptoms. A mental health clinician who interviewed him believed that his behavior might have resulted from shared psychotic disorder, otherwise known as folie à deux. The clinician believed that at the time of the murders, Jens was substantially impaired and should probably be convicted of manslaughter rather than murder. Obviously, the jury in Virginia disagreed. I find the shared psychotic disorder theory interesting because it presumes that both Elizabeth and Jens were psychotic, but there's no indication that they were. According to Jens, when he first met Elizabeth, she was obsessed with her desire to have orgasms, with no regard for his needs. He claimed that they would have prolonged sessions where he would perform oral sex on her. They did not have traditional intercourse until after her parents had been murdered. Before he was extradited, his defense strategy was essentially to prove that he had diminished capacity. Elizabeth was in control. She was incredibly persuasive. She recognized that he was not attractive and that he would consider himself fortunate to be with her. She didn't need him, but he did need her. She told him stories about how terrible her parents were, and he believed her. Jens lost his sense of identity. It became wrapped up in Elizabeth. He was not willing to lose her. He had no other way to engage in sex with another person. He would have done anything to keep her, even kill. At some point, Elizabeth gave him an ultimatum. Either he killed her parents or she was leaving. After his extradition, Jens changed his story. Virginia didn't allow diminished capacity as a defense, so Jens claimed that Elizabeth committed the crime and he took the fall because he loved her. Jens has been able to convince a large number of people that he is innocent and Elizabeth is guilty. There's another group of people that believe that Jens simply would not be convicted today based on the evidence, so not all of them necessarily believe he's truly innocent. His advocates include actor Martin Sheen, writer John Grisham, music producer Jason Flom, and a sheriff from Virginia. Of course, there are many people who believe he is guilty and would be convicted today if he were retried. Each group calls the other group gullible. This takes me to the question, was Jens Soring actually guilty, or did Elizabeth Haysom commit the crime alone or with other conspirators? It seems clear that either Jens or Elizabeth must be guilty, and of course they could both be guilty. But there's no scenario where they are both not guilty. Let's take a look at the factors both for and against the idea that Jens is guilty, starting with the inculpatory evidence. Jens had a motive. The timeline and rental car miles are compatible with either of them being the killer. Jens admitted that he was the killer. He described much of the crime scene accurately. A witness noticed injuries to his hand and face. He was physically capable of committing murder. Derek weighed the same as Jens. Jens was obsessed with Elizabeth. She clearly had a contentious relationship with her parents. In his confession, Jens described how he re-entered the house after the murders in an attempt to find the switch for that front porch light. This is consistent with the bloody sock prints showing that somebody walked out of the house and then walked back in. If Elizabeth was there, she would have known where the switch was. She had spent quite a bit of time there. Now moving to the exculpatory factors. Jens incorrectly described the position of the bodies and what Nancy was wearing. There was a small amount of typo blood found in the house. This was used against Jens in his trial, but later DNA tests showed the blood did not belong to him. There is a dispute as to whether it belonged to Derek Haysom or came from unidentified donors. The bloody sock print that was used against him looked to be about a size 7, but Jens wore a size 8.5. The bloody footprints in the driveway were more consistent with a woman's feet as far as size. During his confession, there was an interesting exchange with the detective. The detective said to him, "Would you consider, under those circumstances, taking into account your answer, pleading guilty to something you didn't do?" Jens responded, "Would I consider doing that? Yes. I can't say for sure right now, but I can see it happening, yes. I think it is a possibility. I think it happens in real life." This made it seem like he was hinting that his confession could be false. Over 25 years after the murders, a mechanic came forward who claimed Elizabeth and a man, who was not Jens, dropped off a car for him to repair. It had blood and a knife in it. I don't think this is particularly exculpatory because the witness does not appear to be credible. It's hard to believe that it would take him over 25 years to come forward, and it's tough to believe that if Elizabeth and a conspirator had just killed her parents, they would give the car to somebody without cleaning it.
Anyone with $10,000 or more in credit card debt or personal loans may qualify for help from National Debt Relief. Minimum payments could literally keep you in debt for decades.
When considering all the evidence, do I think Jens was guilty? Yes, I think he was guilty in reality and beyond a reasonable doubt. I believe Elizabeth wanted her parents dead and conspired with Jens to do it. He actually carried out the murders, but they are equally guilty. Even though I don't put as much weight on confessions as many juries do, the confession in this case is fairly convincing. Many people who advocate for Jens focus on the fact that there is no physical evidence tying him to the crime scene. They do have a good point. Do I think that there is a reasonable doubt that Jens was in the house? Yes, but that's academic. He was in a conspiracy to commit murder, one way or the other. Even if the roles of Jens and Elizabeth were switched, like he was the one at the hotel maintaining the alibi and she was the one who committed the murders physically. Nothing really changes as far as guilt. Moving to the next question, what were the thoughts, feelings, and personality factors that led to these murders? I think this was simply a case of manipulation, probably fueled by narcissism. Jens had no idea how to survive in a romantic relationship. Elizabeth was much more experienced. She knew that he would be desperate and would follow her instructions. Elizabeth wanted a life of adventure and crime. Jens wanted Elizabeth. The contempt that Elizabeth's parents had for Jens only played into Elizabeth's manipulation. I think this was a case where both offenders were self-centered and had a lack of empathy. Everything was about them, and nobody else's feelings mattered. Now moving to my final thoughts. One of the most remarkable parts of this case is how so many Hollywood people have taken the side of Jens. I think skepticism about the justice system is warranted, and it's good that there are people looking out for the wrongly convicted. But in this instance, I think they selected a guilty person to defend. Again, at a minimum, one of the two convicted people was guilty. Why would they choose Elizabeth over Jens as the one who physically committed the murder? The simplest explanation is that Jens was guilty. These celebrities have been willing to overlook obvious problems with his story. I think what may have happened here for some of these celebrities is that they identify with Jens, an intelligent young man with limited social skills who was manipulated by an attractive young woman. This story resonated with many people. They had empathy for the position that Jens was in. I find it ironic that the reason for their advocacy, at least in part, is emotional reasoning, the same factor that motivated the homicides in the first place. This exemplifies how emotional reasoning is dangerous no matter where it is placed. Those are my thoughts in the case of Jens Soring and Elizabeth Haysom. Please put any opinions and thoughts in the comment section. They always generate an interesting dialogue. As always,
All right. So, what I eventually want to find, if I can, is both Elizabeth Haysom's testimony and Jens Soring's testimony, because both of their testimony against each other is just like, wow. The difference between Elizabeth Haysom's trial and Jens Soring's is also just, oh, excuse me, I was yawning. Is just astounding. Um, because Elizabeth Hayes basically the same story and the same contempt for her parents, even a 4 years difference. Um, while Jens went from admitting that he had done this to flat out denying that he had done it. And he tried to use these movie tickets as his like proof that he wasn't even there. And he even tried to blame the two guys that were arrested. Oh, Jesus. I apologize. This time of year always sucks out my energy. Um, but Jens and his defense team tried to blame these two gentlemen. Why am I calling them gentlemen? These two criminals, um, who were arrested in 1985 for a very similar murder. And I find it odd. I find it funny, um, that, you know, Jens and his team just miss the mark by like a mile on that. So what I'm going to do is I am going to do a little bit more research. This case, I remember seeing bits and pieces of it as I was growing up, but this took place in 1990, for Jens's trial, where Elizabeth's was in like 86 or something. And, or I think Elizabeth's was in 88, something like that. Elizabeth's was like 2 years after the murders, and Jens's was like 4 years after the murder. Um, so I was fairly young for both of them. If Elizabeth was tried in 86, then I wouldn't have been born yet. If Elizabeth was tried in 88, then I would have been a year old. In 90, I'd have been 4. So while I remember their faces, I don't really remember much of the trial outside of that. But I do remember my mom watching the trial. I remember finding it interesting. But I wasn't quite as old as I was for like the O.J. Simpson trial and stuff like that, where I was able to remember a little bit more about it um, over the years. So this trial really, while it does spark a few memories, in the little bit of trial uh, information that I have been able to find, I want to see if I can find more of the trial. I would love to deep dive the entire trial if I could. I don't think that we're going to be able to, but I feel like even covering this on a surface level is still worth doing. Just because the back and forth, it really makes it very difficult to see, you know, did Elizabeth plan this out with somebody else, or was this really Yen? I do agree with Dr. Grande, where I don't see a scenario where both of them are innocent, or even where really Jens is innocent. I do agree with Dr. Grande that I feel that the way that they have explained this, the rules could have been reversed, where as long as you put them in either scenario, it fits. Um, and so let me know what you guys think. Does this seem like a case that you guys would like to hear more about? Um, does this seem like it could have some interesting aspects for you? Um, please let me know. I am more than willing to hear what you guys think. Um, I really strive for the feedback and the conversation with everybody. Um, I know we stopped at a really not so fun point in the trial. We are going to get past everybody's the last of everybody's testimony here, and we are going to hop from break. So, and let's get into day 3.
All right, lunch is.
Check this out. I'm going to show you how I afforded this car. Okay, you ready? All right, $118
couple of ground rules. All right. Again, we're in uncharted waters. We don't have big, long, complicated trials like this every year, although we've had 2 in the past year, but I haven't had one since 2021. But I have not sequestered y'all, okay? Y'all don't want, exactly. We don't want to do that, all right? So I'm trying to avoid that. I'm also trying to get this case tried in a reasonable time frame. That's part of why we're having lunch brought in a few days a week. If you don't want to participate in that and go off on your own, that's fine. But if you choose to do that, I need you to go away and not hang around. Because if you're hanging around the building, I want to have you in a controlled environment being monitored by either court staff or bailiffs to make sure that no one comes up to y'all and does anything inappropriate, since we have lots of coverage, lots of witnesses, lots of folks around the building. We have the entire district attorney's office. We have defense attorneys in and out of the building. We have media all over the place. So if y'all are going to be on the campus, I want y'all supervised. Now, when I said y'all could go walk or whatever, I meant for y'all to eat first and then go for a walk. So we had to take care of that. I've talked to Jody, our court administrator, and we're going to see if between her and the bailiffs and court staff, we can have someone at the top and bottom of the pavers where the park benches are, to the side of the building right here in front of the art center, where y'all can stroll and enjoy the lovely weather that we're having. All right? But we're going to have you eat in up here first, even though having a nice little picnic would be great. Then we have to clean up and get all the stuff and all the mess. So we're going to, I want y'all to eat here, and then y'all can go for a little walkabout. If you choose not to participate, that's fine. Let us know on the front end so we don't order your lunch and pay $12 for a ham sandwich. But you have to be back in the room 10 minutes before I say we're going to start back, which means that you only have 50 minutes to go get lunch, which isn't enough time. So make sure you do all that. And we're going to try to make better accommodations for that on Friday, and that's one of my plan. I'm going to talk to y'all later at the end of the day or after maybe Friday. We'll see what y'all want to do and whether y'all want to eat in every day or not. I think it would be good for everybody to have a little bit extra extended time. You know, I think the lawyers would like that too, because they're working through their lunch break too, preparing for the next witness. All right, we have taken care of our monitor issue. Someone kicked the power strip and turned it off. We have rewired everything and tucked it up underneath another cable so that it's not on the floor, and hopefully no one will kick it again. All right, with that, let's get back.
Thank you, Mark. Mr. Braswell, my name is John Luke Weaver, and I am Melody's attorney, one of Melody's attorneys. I want to talk to you about a few things that you spoke about earlier. It sounded like you made it out that you and Melody weren't really good friends. Y'all were just kind of acquaintances.
Well, we were friends, but I mean, that was it. I mean, that was all it was.
Well, no, that's one thing. But y'all were friends,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Pretty close.
Yeah.
Talked on almost a daily basis.
Someday, yeah.
Because, I mean, just going back and looking at
Right.
the messages that they showed earlier, you know, that was just a clip from about 2016.
Right.
And, I mean, it looked like you guys talked a lot. But I'm going to come back to that. But you would say, yeah, we were friends.
Yeah.
All right. So how did you meet Melody?
Like I said, Sherry Cooper was
Who's Sherry Cooper?
Well, she's Sherry Stain. Sherry Cooper lived past Melanie, and they walked a lot.
On what road?
On Old Purcell Lane, across Birmingham Road, Old Birmingham Way, and the road ended right there at my house. And the first time I met her, I was cutting grass, and they were walking, and Sherry waved me down and introduced me to Melanie.
So you knew Sherry before Melody?
Oh, yeah, a long time.
How long you known Sherry?
I'm going to say probably 2006 or 7.
All right. And what's the nature of y'all's friendship?
Do what?
How did y'all become friends?
Oh, in the horse world.
In the horse world?
Yeah.
Okay.
She had kids with horses, and I actually did some pasture work and built her a horse arena.
All right. So y'all known each other, and that's about 2016 is when you met Melody, or maybe even sooner?
So I think it was 16 or 17.
Would it refresh your memory that she moved there in 2013?
It wasn't that soon. No.
Okay.
I didn't meet her then.
All right. So sometime between 2013 and 2016. But y'all got pretty close as far as friends.
Yeah, just friends. Yeah.
Talking daily. All right. Why do you think y'all became good friends?
I don't know. I know her grandkids and my kid were the same age, and they, worked or played together.
All right.
Yeah.
So that maybe that was part of how it kind of...
I guess. I don't know. I mean, there was nothing ever any further than friends. I'll promise you that.
And again, that's not...
Yeah,
I'm not alleging that. But what I am trying to get at is that you knew most of her kids and her husband. You knew of them, or at least talked to them, to Melody, about them to Melody, and back and forth.
I didn't know either one of the girls. I knew Scott.
Okay.
And I met Chris one time.
All right, but you knew Scott. Mm-hmm. All right, so you knew Scott. So let's talk about physical appearance of Scott. How tall would you say Scott Ferris was? Is
6'5", 6'6".
Big kid, big guy.
Big guy.
All right, how much do you think he weighed?
I have no clue. 230, 240, maybe. I don't know.
But he's about 6'5", somewhere in there.
Yeah.
Would you say he's more like 300 pounds or more like 250?
He was in pretty good shape. I mean, he was, I'd say I don't know, 250. I mean, it's hard to judge somebody. I know how much I weigh, and I know how tall I am.
Well, I'm not going to answer that. All right, so, and you met Gary.
Yeah.
All right, how tall was Gary? How big was Gary?
He's a big guy.
How big was he?
I'd say he's 6'5".
All right.
Better, yeah.
All right. And how much do you think he weighed?
I'm going to say 250, 300.
Somewhere in there?
Yeah.
All right. And how tall, I mean, Melody's been sitting over here most of the trial, but how tall do you think she is?
5'9", maybe. I don't know.
You think 5'9"? How about more like 5'3" or 5'4"?
Well, maybe. She's not very tall.
Okay. And how much, and I know you don't ever ask a woman's weight, but how much do you think she weighs?
125, maybe.
Okay. So that, you've seen him. You physically. But tell me about Scott. Tell me about your interactions with Scott. The best you can. I know you don't want to be here, Mr. Bradford.
Never much. I mean, just seeing him eating with her and running into him at Tractor Supply and just on the road. I mean, we talked hunting a little bit because he was a big hunter.
Have you ever discussed or knew about his temper? Did you know about Scott having a temper?
No, not really.
Did you know about Scott serving in Afghanistan?
Yeah.
All right. Did you...
Just knew that he did.
You knew of it?
Do what?
You knew of it?
I just knew of it. Yeah.
Okay. Did you know of any difficulties that Scott had been having with his dad?
No.
All right. Did you know of any issues that Scott was having financially, meaning he didn't have a job? Did you know that?
Well, I knew he worked there on the farm, but I didn't know if they paid him or what. I knew he worked on the farm, cleaning up and cutting grass and whatnot.
All right. Did you know how he paid for anything or got money?
Okay, so a somewhat regular theme that you're going to see throughout this trial is going to be that Scott Ferris was mostly the one that worked the farm. Now, I don't know how many of you have farming experience, but even me growing up in the country, you would be surprised at what a country girl is taught to do. The strength that we have is amazing. Now, like, I helped my dad build sheds and I worked on my mom's tractor and, you know, things like that. Even after my stepdad and my mom, were getting divorced and things like that, I worked on the cars, I worked on the tractor, I kept things in good order. I was the one that did most of the heavy lifting and the heavier work. So I can only imagine how strong Scott Ferris has to be. Um, and one reoccurring theme that you also continue to hear is how Melody Ferris and Gary Ferris weren't really involved with the day-to-day activities of the farm and all of the work with the farm. So it's safe to say that Melody and Gary probably were a little softer. They wouldn't be quite as strong and as calloused and as hard as Scott in some ways. Um, and while that goes to not speak badly about Scott or Melody or Gary, but it does go to explain the strength factor. Because I'm not convinced that Melody alone would have been able to move the body. There's really nothing that shows that she regularly lifted heavy things. It very much seemed like she had a husband and two sons to do a good majority of the heavy lifting for her. And look, I'm not one to complain. I have a husband that will do my heavy lifting for me. Um, and so I will admit that I have gotten soft compared to my days when I had to do significantly more for myself. But in the same respect, like, I'm grateful for my husband who does play pack mule for me fairly often when it comes to the heavy stuff. Um, I am grateful for the parts of my life that I have been able to soften up because of my husband. And I think that is a big difference between, um, you know, Melody Ferris, Gary Ferris, and the kids. Like, I feel that they were never made to have to appreciate the things in life that they didn't have to work for. And I think that's a big part of what led to this problem. Um, it's one of those instances that kind of shows that money truly can't buy happiness. Um, you know, Communication, connection, and hard work kind of lead to a lot of that. Um, Gratitude and appreciation also leads to a happier life versus money. But it also, to some extent, goes to show more to the capabilities of Scott Ferris. Because again, not hoarding, herding animals, horses, things like that takes a lot of skill and it takes a lot of strength. Especially considering I don't believe that they had any dogs. I haven't heard any mention. Um, Recently a dog. Now, we do know that they did at one point have a dog and that there had been a dog bite earlier in the year that the Ferrises or the Gary Ferris had passed away. But I don't know if they got rid of the dog at the time or if the dog was still there. Um, so I do know that in the past they had dogs, but even if you have a herding dog, they require an immense amount of strength, even a well trained one. I have a herding dog. He is my service dog in training, and he requires a lot. He can pull equal to any pit bull or Great Dane. Like, he is not a small dog, and I love my boy. Um, so, taking the things in my life that I can kind of sit here and put myself in both Melody and Scott's shoes really makes it hard for me to be able to see how Melody could have killed and moved Gary Ferris. Now, the people who are saying that, he was shot out at the burn pile, absolutely. I am totally behind you on that. That if she did do this, she didn't shoot him in the house. The blood from the house, I believe, could have been from a dog bite that had happened prior to the murder. I'm not entirely sure how much before the murder that had happened. I just know that it happened before the murder. Um, and so I really feel like there is an opportunity for Melody to have done this, but I really feel with the way that the prosecution is presenting the evidence, that it makes it highly unlikely that Melody did this, if that makes sense. But I'm going to go back to letting the defense talk, and let's see what else comes up.
I thought the truck was Gary's. I didn't know where he even had a vehicle or not, you know.
Okay. Did you know did you ever hear him complain or say anything about having to go get money from Gary all the time to do anything?
No, he never talked about that with me.
Okay. So Mr. Fogus mentioned something, and I don't think you necessarily answered it. It was sometime after July the 5th. I believe you ran into Scott at the gas station up in Ducktown.
I think that's where it was, yeah. I'm pretty sure.
That's the one right there on 20, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So you went there, and what did he say? You must have said something in one of the
He
interviews.
was getting fuel, and I was getting fuel, and I mean, we were, just the pump between us.
Right.
And I just told him I was sorry about his dad. I mean, I'd heard about it, and he was just, so you could tell he was suffering from it,
All right. Well, what do you mean? You got to help him.
Well, I mean, he wasn't crying, but you could tell he was upset because his dad had passed away.
All right. Did he tell you anything?
Huh?
Did he tell you anything?
Oh, no. Mm-mm.
Anything he thought had happened?
No.
All right. And you remember being interviewed in this case?
Being interviewed?
Interviewed?
Yes,
remember that?
yes.
And they did a phone dump of your phone.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And I want to show you. We'll show you some text messages. If you just take a look at that, there should be about 8 pages there.
Judge, I'll sit with you. All right.
And I can put them on the big. I'm going to put them on the big screen. But if that print's too small. And you take your time, sir.
Do what?
You take your time to look through them.
Oh, you want me to look through them?
Yes, sir. Just thumb through.
Okay.
All right, thanks, sir. If I can have that back. And it should be able to come up on your screen, but and you stipulated this. Absolutely. This time I would ask to move into evidence defense exhibits 1 through 8, Braswell. Mr. Braswell, I'm showing you some text messages that would be from around the time of July the 3rd, July the 4th, July the 5th, and July the 2nd of 2018 between you and Melody.
Mm-hmm.
So this message right here, raining on the hill. Are you familiar with that message? Did that refresh your memory?
Yeah, that was just typical, you know.
All right. Is that from you or from Melody? Can you tell?
Well, that's from her.
All right. And that would be the 1987 number.
Yeah.
And yours would have been 1829?
1829.
All right. And you say simply, yeah, I know. Is that you? Says, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
You and Melody talk about the rain. Didn't rain much. Yeah. And that'd be the sum total of the conversations that you guys had on July the 2nd.
Right.
Standard stuff. Did y'all do that a lot?
Yeah.
All right. So July the 3rd. Looks like from Melody to you. Says, good morning. You going hard at it. What does that mean to you?
Working.
Okay. And I believe that day you were going to be working on Post Road.
Right.
All right. And you responded. How'd you respond, sir?
Hey, yeah, been at it since early.
And that's July the 3rd, 2018. All right. So this would be the morning of July the 4th from Melody to you. It says, good morning, you okay? And you say back what?
Call if you want to, I'm driving.
All right. And Melody says, I'm good, working as usual, will in a bit.
Mm-hmm.
And the next thing, I think you tried to type okay. I don't
Yeah,
know.
that's probably.
Is that what that is?
Yeah.
Okay, and then you sent okay. All right. That's just on July the 4th, that morning. So later on that day, that afternoon, you say, or she says to you, you having a happy 4th? Is that the way you read that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And you say,
So far, so good. Trying to call you. Fixing the road.
Mr. Weaver, can I go back? Who was that one from?
oh, that one would have been from, actually, I believe that was from you. You asked if
Yeah, I asked her, you having a good 4th.
you asked that. All right,
Yeah.
sorry. And then you say, so far, so good. Melody said, so far, so good. Tried calling you, fixing the roll. Did you know where she was going that day?
I have no clue.
All right.
Well, no, I'm not sure if that was the day they went to the Lake Lanier Islands or not.
Okay, and I think in a further text message, I think it kind of clears that up.
Right.
All right. And then Melody says, tried calling you. Did y'all talk at all that day? Do you remember?
I don't remember.
BK, rolling, try you later. That's Melody again.
Right.
And then you say,
Well, dang.
well, dang. Then on the 4th, again, later on that evening, you, I believe, texted, what is that?
You still at the island.
Right. So that would be Lake Lanier Island.
Right.
We're almost done, Mr. Bradwell. I know this is a slow, monotonous task, and if I knew how to zoom this thing out, it probably could go quicker.
I marked the tape for you.
I know you did. The tape's been a big help. I've just been sitting over there for days. I've gotten sluggish. All right, here we go. Good morning, you okay? Again, from Mel. This is the 5th. This appears to be. Do y'all start every morning this way? Back in these days. Back in these days. Would that be fair? How y'all talk?
Yeah, fair. I mean, I'm not going to say it was every day, but a lot of days.
Right. Call me when you can. All right. Do you remember back around that time that, and your daughter's name is what again?
Emma.
Emma. Was Emma going to go over and hang out with
I think so.
Ella?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I can't remember that one point right in there, Ella, her granddaughter, went with my ex-wife and Emma, but I don't remember.
Your ex-wife Beth?
Huh?
Is your ex-wife
Right, yeah.
Beth?
Mhm.
Okay.
But I don't remember the time frame right there, but it was one of those days.
In that time period. All right. The 5th at 7:58 p.m. says just, hey, can I call you? From Melody to you. No, actually, that's from you to Melody.
Do I?
It's from you to Melody. It says, hey, can I call you? Because you're 1829, right? That's your phone number?
Yeah, that's my phone.
Okay. And then finally, from Melody, call me when you can. I'm finally home. Got your message. I'm so sorry. Okay.
I think Emma was at like on their islands with them. I'm not positive, but
Okay. Well, going back through this conversation, you know, this is during the time that Mr. Ferris was murdered. The state, I believe, is alleging. Did you notice, was anything out of the ordinary that you noticed at all
not that I know of.
with your friend Melody?
Not that I know.
Okay. Everything seemed normal. Yes? Okay. If I may have one moment, Your Honor. I do want to say this. So in those messages the state showed you earlier, before lunch, you remember the message about the threat of the gruesome death?
Yeah, I saw
What
it.
you saw on the
Right,
screens?
right.
And I can't figure out how to get back over to that screen. But I'm just simply asking you that in all these messages, so that the state took your cell phone, and they went through how many years had you had that cell phone?
Years.
Years.
Yeah.
So in all those years and all those messages, that's the only kind of message like that, yes? You got to respond, yes or no, for the court reporter. So in all those years, that's the only kind of message like that, correct?
Right.
Okay.
All right, Ferris. Thanks, Judge. Just switch to channel 1 or? Yeah, we'll switch.
You don't have to do anything else down there unless you plug in a laptop.
Mr. Terry, you're almost done. Just hold on just a little bit.
Push number 1, then you mess it up.
Won't be the last time you're on there. All right. Mr. Terry, I'm on page 5 of page 15 Roswell one. It's not all of them, but some of the messages that were found on your phone. So you see to the left of the screen, it says 23, then it's from Melody to you on August 14, 2016. And you see where it says, you two, you have done a great job with Emma. Be proud.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Emma is your child, but you were married to Beth at the time.
Right.
She went out of wedlock and had a child.
Right.
But you've raised her. She's yours. You love her. Proud of her.
Right.
You love your kids, don't you?
Oh, yeah.
And when you talk to, I mean, are you just a compassionate guy?
I guess. I mean, that's just the way I've always been.
You don't get riled up too much, do you?
No.
Seen too much, done too much. During this conversation about Emma, would Melody sometimes walk with Emma or see her?
I think Emma did walk with them sometimes. Yeah.
And then she gives you a compliment about how you raised Emma.
Mm-hmm.
And you respond by saying, thank you, just what I have to, right?
Right.
Then on 25 here, on August 14, 2016, can you read that, what I'm going to highlight here for you? Can you see that?
Very true. Gary was no help with mine, but I survived and with actually some sanity left. Well, maybe.
She responds that Gary was not a help with her children. Do you remember, y'all talked when you saw each other in the community, is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Talk on the phone a good bit?
Text more than anything, probably.
But were conversations at times? Text messages? And I think she actually called you, was it on July 5th when she was on the way to Walmart, I believe?
Maybe, yeah.
And I guess that was when Ella and Emma talking about things around that time. Did she ever go into other details about problems she had with Gary and not feeling that he was not helping her?
No, not really. I mean,
She liked to clean, didn't she?
oh, yeah.
She was almost OCD.
Mm-hmm.
She liked to cook.
Yeah, I think she cooked for them every day. I mean, they'd go out to eat at lunch, but I think she cooked every night.
How much did she like her house?
It was the grounds and just going inside. It was very nice.
Now, fair to say you don't really have anything bad to say about the defendant?
No.
Would you agree that she's a hard worker?
Yeah.
Would you agree
I saw her.
Would you agree that she's smart? Is that yes?
Yeah. Yes.
Agree that she can get after and take care of her own property? Would you think would you consider her to be independent-minded and independent-willed? Is that yes?
Yes.
I know you're shaking.
I know. No, I'm not.
Yeah, I apologize. I'm not trying to come across pushy. House was beautiful, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Now, we've talked about Rusty, and you've told us about Rusty. I don't think that's going to... It's going to be something we're going to meet Rusty. Jerry's going to get to meet Rusty. The first time you talked to law enforcement, though, you didn't tell me anything about Rusty, did you?
No.
And you didn't really go into the details that we've asked you today. Is that fair?
Yeah.
And they kind of had to talk to you about the 2 phone numbers?
Right.
Is it because, and I understand why, is it because you didn't want to add anything to hurt your friend?
Yeah.
You don't know what happened, do you?
No. I have no clue.
And fair to say you don't really want to add anything to it? You don't want to add anything, get her in trouble or anything like that?
I don't know anything else to add. I mean,
It is what it is.
it is what it is.
Judge O'Fallon, one moment. Judge, you might just have one moment. Is there a reason why you didn't call and you were close to her though? I mean, y'all were friends.
We're just friends, yeah.
Okay. And did you care for her back in 2018?
What do you mean? Just
Friendship. Did you
just
like?
friendship?
Yeah,
no.
sir. I'm not saying.
That was it.
I'm not saying you
Yeah.
had an inappropriate relationship.
Right. No.
But you were friends. You were close.
Yeah.
You share things about other people, family members. I think one time you joked about maybe you should set Gary up with Beth.
Oh yeah.
So,
I think we did make that comment one time.
But y'all were close.
Yeah.
If she needed help, would you call and talk to her and help her?
Yeah.
Can you tell me why you never called her and asked her what happened to Gary?
I don't know. I mean, she texted me and told me what the deal was, and
That just he was found on the burn pile?
found dead, and it was
But nothing after that?
nothing after that.
Didn't find that odd?
Yeah.
Thanks, sir.
Weaver?
So going back to the two cell phones, and I'm going to try to move real fast on these questions. Two cell phones, that wasn't a secret. You knew she had them.
Yeah.
Sherry knew she had them.
Mhm.
Emma knew she had them too, right?
I'm sure she did.
It
But
was
she was
just-
13 years old, so that's a different.
But it didn't look like she was trying to hide anything, right?
Right.
Okay. Because Gary and Melody, everybody knew they lived separate lives, right?
Right.
Gary lived at the Gary lived in the basement, Melody lived upstairs. They had their own lives. You knew that. Did you know anything about Gary having relationships with any people
No,
at
I
work?
didn't.
Didn't know. But you just knew it was very obvious the way they lived their life. Not a secret. You got to nod. You got to say yes or no.
Yes.
Okay. And as far as you not getting a phone call in detail about everything that was happening following finding of Gary's body, isn't it fair to say that she had a lot of things going on at that time?
Probably.
Okay. She needed to be with her family?
Do I?
That she needed to be with her family?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. That's all I have, Judge.
All right, anything else?
Judge, Mr. Terry get released.
All right, that'd be fine. Step down, sir. Thank you. All right, call your next witness.
State calls Chris Ferris.
Y'all can stretch or not.
If you could please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give in the matter now pending before the court will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Have a seat. Could you please introduce yourself to the jury?
My name is Christopher Wayne Ferris.
Chris, how is it that you know the defendant in this case?
She's my mother.
And I want to go into a little bit about the background of your family.
Okay.
When did you move to Georgia?
2005.
Where did you
Excuse me, 1995, sorry.
Okay. Is it fair to say you're a little nervous?
I'm a little nervous.
Okay.
I mean, it's my first time on this trial. So.
Sure.
And move the microphone in front of you, and if you'll just talk over it. You don't have to talk into it.
Okay, great.
So is that 1995 you said?
Yes, 1995.
And where did you move from?
Hoover, Alabama, suburb of Birmingham.
A suburb of Birmingham?
Correct.
How old were you?
15.
And do you have siblings?
Yes.
Okay, and how old were your siblings when you moved?
My brother would have been 12, my brother Scott. My sister Emily. I should probably know this, but I would say 5 or 6, and then Amanda would have been, she's the youngest, would have been around, I guess, 4 or 5.
Why did you move here from Alabama in 1995?
My father came to open the Atlanta office for Byrne Foreman, his law firm.
How long had he been with Byrne Foreman when you moved here in 1995?
So about 5 or 6 years, I would imagine. So that was yep, about that.
Were you around when Gary went to law school?
I was.
How old were you?
Well, I started kindergarten when he started law school, so
5 or 6?
5 or 6, yeah, correct.
So you got to see him work through law school?
I did.
And how was that?
It was great. I mean, from what I remember, I mean, he used to take me to the law school and we'd play laser tag, and when he would work security, he had a job working security, so I had a lot of, for a little kid, a big law school to run around in, it was, it was fun.
So in law school, did he also work for Byrne Foreman?
I think he clerked with them in the summer, from what I remember.
Okay, and then in 1995, he came here to open the Atlanta office for Byrne Foreman.
Correct.
Okay. Did Gary like his job?
Absolutely, yes.
And when you moved here, what city did you move to? In Georgia?
Alpharetta, Georgia.
What school did you end up going to? What high school?
Milton High School.
Okay. And after high school, what did you do?
Went to the University of Alabama.
For how long?
I left there in 2002, so it would have been 3.5, 4 years.
Did you eventually come back to Georgia?
I did.
Okay. What did you do after that?
I had like a job at a local restaurant, and then I met my first wife right around then.
When you were working at the restaurant, did you live at the home in Alpharetta, or did you live somewhere else?
When I was working at the restaurant, I lived at home.
At home. And so you said then you met your first wife.
Mm-hmm.
And what was her name?
Kendall Lee.
Okay. And how long were you with Kendall Lee?
Well, we eventually got married and had 2 children, and we separated in 2007.
What are your children's names?
Ella Grace and Addison Marie.
When were they born?
Ella was born September of 2004, Addison August of 2006.
Okay. Once they were born, did you guys ever leave Georgia?
Oh yeah, about a couple weeks after Ella, the oldest, was born, we moved to Maine.
How long were you in Maine for?
So that would have been 2004, about 3 years.
I want to go back to your parents and their background a little bit. We talked about Gary's job. What did your mom do when she was, when Gary was in law school?
Homemaker, took care of us, took care of the house.
Kept her busy. There were 4 of you.
Correct, yes.
And when you were in Alabama, did you guys have family around?
Oh yeah.
Who was around?
both sets of grandparents, my aunt, both aunts, my uncle. They were in Tuscumbia, Muscle Shoals area.
And is that where you were before coming to Alpharetta in 1995, Muscle Shoals area?
No, I was in Hoover. Muscle Shoals is the northwest corner of Alabama. So we were, from Tuscaloosa, which is where he attended the University of Alabama Law School, then went to work for Burr & Foreman, which was in Hoover. Well, it was in Birmingham. We lived in Hoover, and then we moved to Alpharetta in 1995.
And all of your family stayed in Alabama, essentially, the family you just mentioned.
Yes, correct.
Okay. Did you learn when you were in Alabama a lot about how your parents grew up?
Absolutely, yes.
And who did you learn that information from?
I would say both of them. My father would talk all the time about his growing up and things he would do, and my mother would talk about it as well.
What would your mother share with you about her upbringing?
Mentioning how they lived in Nashville for a time, and working at the hardware store in Muscle Shoals, and that's what really comes to mind at first.
So you mentioned a hardware store. Tell the jury a little bit about that.
So my grandfather owned an Ace hardware store in Muscle Shoals, Alabama, and I really enjoyed going there as a child. It was great. You could run around and play and, build things with the little tools and the wood and the little woodworking things. And I always enjoyed getting up with my grandfather and going to Burger King or McDonald's for breakfast. I got a big kick out of that. And it was a great time. And I really enjoyed, my grandfather was a huge Alabama football fan, and he loved to talk about football, and so I always would enjoy people coming in to talk to him about the football team, and I think that's kind of where my, love for football in Alabama kind of came from, as well as my father.
And when you mentioned this grandfather, are you talking about Melody's dad?
Yes.
And the one who owned the Ace hardware store?
That is correct.
Okay. Was he a hunter as well?
Carl? No, not that I ever knew.
Did he own guns?
Yes.
About how many guns did he own?
I don't know how many. I know he would take us to shoot, 22 rifles at this outside of town, and it was like a rock quarry. So I know of those, and then I knew of. I remember when we would go do that, he would shoot some pistols, but I would not know how many guns he owned.
Sure. Did Melody grow up shooting guns?
I don't know that.
And do you know what happened to Carl? Eventually?
Yeah, I know. Yes, I do.
Okay, can you share with the jury?
He had a heart attack and was in ICU for a pretty long time. I assume ICU for I think a week or two at least before he eventually passed away.
What year was that?
It would be 2007, 1997. I apologize. These 2000s and the 90s get me. 1997. He actually suffered a heart attack on my 17th birthday.
Okay. You were already here in Georgia when
we were. Passed. That is correct.
Okay. I want to move along a little bit and jump ahead to your parents' marriage.
Okay.
At what point did you learn that your parents had a little bit of a rough marriage?
Not until the late 2000s, 2008, 2009, after I had moved back from Atlanta, or moved back from Maine back to Atlanta.
Okay, so you and Kendall Lee had moved to Maine, and you had already moved back.
Yeah,
after
I
that.
moved back. Yes,
Okay.
correct.
What caused you to learn about the trouble in their marriage?
My father told me.
Okay. When was that?
I would say late 2008 to early 2009 is when I first got wind of that from him.
Why did he share that with you?
I don't really know why he did. Why he initially started sharing things like that with me, but once he did, he continued to share things like that with me.
And you said that was in the late 2000s?
Correct.
And did he continue to share those troubles with you up until he died?
Oh, yes, 100%.
At any point, did you learn about your mother's relationship with Ted Wiley?
Yes.
When did you learn about that?
Well, the dates, I'm not quite sure. I want to say, suspicion-wise, probably somewhere around late 2008, 2009. And then when there was an incident with financially, when it was really brought to the forefront.
You mentioned suspicion.
Yeah.
What caused suspicion to you?
Well, I think what my dad told me is he was kind of suspicious. My brother, I believe, was the one who kind of initially had those suspicions. But my suspicion, I always thought Ted Wiley was just a little bit too, I don't know, I guess maybe flirtatious with my mother.
Who is Ted Wiley?
Ted Wiley.
So, while Chris is going to explain who Ted Wiley is and his relationship to the family even prior to his mother's affair, what I find strange is I think that Ted Wiley and Melody Ferris were probably having an affair long before the kids noticed it. Just because some of the incidences where Ted Wiley was feeling on his mom and stuff like that doesn't really seem like something that would come out of nowhere. Shit, sorry. The yawning today is just killing me. But I feel like Melody and Ted Wiley were probably having a more secretive affair prior to some of these incidences that Chris and Scott end up talking about, where Ted Wiley's grabbing their mom's ass and all kinds of stuff. And so it really makes me think that there was potentially a relationship that was more hidden long before the kids realized. And I'm assuming that the same thing probably happened with Rusty Barton as well. That the kids probably didn't know right away, and that there was a good chance that that I'm trying to think. I feel like there's this time period where the kids probably didn't know until their mom became more obvious with it, and more out in the open with some of these affairs. And I feel like she probably kept them hidden to some extent until she felt like they were more of a permanent thing. But let me know what you think after you hear some of this testimony. Do you think that these were kind of just out in the open affairs the entire time, or do you feel like they were possibly hidden for a while before the kids found out?
He was actually in a relationship with my Aunt Sherry
Did
for
you
years.
know? Did you know him personally?
Oh, yeah. I mean, he'd been around for a long time. I remember when I was a child. I mean, not that old, and maybe 7 or 8 years old. And that's when I don't remember the dates, but I was young.
So you knew of Ted Wiley long before any, as you say, suspicions of Ted and your mother.
Oh, absolutely, yes.
How well did you know him? Would you hang out with him, have conversations with him?
Oh, yeah, he was very friendly. I remember, Christmases, we would always go to Christmas at my grandparents, Mama and Papa, which is my father's parents. Every year, Ted would be there, and he'd bring a football, and we'd, throw the football around, and he was always very kind, and he was a funny guy. He was part of the family.
Did you see Ted and Melody around each other in the late 2000s?
Yes.
Did you see them interact with one another?
Yes.
And did anything stand out to you at that time?
Yes.
Tell the jury about that.
I had ridden up to Florence, Alabama with my mother. I was actually picking up a vehicle that was my grandmother's, and we stayed at Ted's house, and he was sitting next to my mother. I was laying on the couch. Can't remember if I was still watching TV or if I was kind of in and out of drifting off to sleep. And I remember Ted and my mother sitting next to each other, and I just kind of thought it was just weird and uneasy. But this was actually November of 2008. So now that I think about that, yeah, it was November 2008. So I think that would probably be when my suspicions really began to arise.
And how did you know, how were your suspicions confirmed?
I was living in Buckhead with my ex-wife, Jenna, and my father told me, he's like, I need you to come up to Alpharetta tonight and have dinner with me. I said, okay. He said, meet me at Outback Steakhouse, the corner of Jones Bridge, Stage Bridge, and Alpharetta. And he sat me down and he said, Chris, I don't think we're going to be able to have Christmas this year. And he began to explain that, why we wouldn't. He told me that my mother had withdrawn, I believe, $50,000 from a home equity line of credit without his knowing about it.
Okay, so I want to address this HELOC that they are talking about. The HELOC was specifically created so that Melody would be able to have access to money for the house, and things like that. It was mentioned by the defense at one point, as to why the HELOC was even created. Give me 1 second. Sorry, the dogs were arguing. They're not getting along very well at the moment. My smaller dog is being very crab-assy, while my larger dog is just like, oh, here, I'm annoying you. Let's be the typical toddler brother and annoy you even more. And so I didn't want them barking and growling at each other to really come across on the live. Um, but I feel like as Chris and Scott and the kids being adults, Christmas shouldn't really matter as much. It's about family, not money. Um, and the fact that they put a huge emphasis on materialistic things really makes me wonder. Chris isn't the only one that does it. Scott and Emily do it as well. Amanda does too, but to a different extent. Um, Scott and Chris are very much of the mindset of, oh no, we don't get materialistic things, so it's a dark day for us. Where Emily seems more jealous of the fact that Scott and Chris got so much paid for them, that things were very based around money for Chris and Scott, while Emily did not get as much. And it seems like Amanda got even less from her father than even Emily did. And so I'm very interested to hear how you guys view this so far. What you guys are taking from Chris's testimony. This is a little bit easier to talk about and to kind of analyze because um, you can kind of see where it's just his rendition. It's not something scientific or anything like that. So it's a little bit easier to talk about. You don't have to be an expert to go over a normal witness's testimony.
Or just, and he told me, I don't know if we're going to be able to have Christmas this year because of this.
Who was at that dinner?
I think it was, I know I was there, and I think one of my sisters, I think Amanda was there too, but I can't be sure about that.
What year was that?
Oh, that's a good question.
I was just going to put this in the chat, but then I decided not to. I also find it strange that this was such a pivotal conversation that it stuck in his memory, but he can't remember who was there. He can't remember when this took place. He can't really remember anything outside of the conversation that him and his dad had. It was really weird because if something's going to stick out in my mind, I'm going to remember roughly at least the time of year that it happened. Um, I am going to remember who was there with me and that type of stuff. Like, even when my mom passed away, and I don't get along with my mom. I never really got along with my mom. My mom and I had some major issues. Um, but in the same respect, like I remember right before my mom passed away, um, some woman who is actually going to be featured on Unsolved Mysteries in December, um, they had found her severed head, and they had found it on part of the road that my mom was on. Um, And so I called my dad and I had sent him a news article about this. And I was like, do you think that could be mom? Because my mom had cancer. She could have lost weight. She could have cut her hair. Like there was a lot of similarities to this woman's face that almost made us think that it could have been potentially my mom. Especially considering it was found on the road that my mom lived on. Um, They never figured out who this woman was, but my mom ultimately passed away just a couple of weeks after this woman's head was found. Now, my mom looked very much like um, she had the last time that I had seen her, and I had been sent a picture from her caregiver at the time, who had been taking care of her. And so I know what my mom looked like right before she had passed away. Um, and I even remember that we found out after, like a couple of weeks after my mom had passed away, because my dad had gotten a phone call from the neighbor. Um, and so it is just one of those things where you kind of remember things like this. If he can remember that his dad had a heart attack when he was 17, because that was something that stood out to him, why don't you remember more details about this significant moment in your time that you can remember the exact conversation and you can remember the exact conversation as to why it even happened, what the consequences of that was going to be, and exactly how much money your mom took out. But you can't remember who was there and you can't remember when this conversation happened. It just seems a little weird. To me, it seems fabricated. Um, as a lot of people have studied, we retain more details on experiences that we have lived through than we do things that are made up or only partially remembered. We can also alter our very own memories based on how many times we tell a a fabrication, to the point where we almost believe that those details actually happened to us. Uh, I'll have to see if I can find some of the psychological studies that I have read on that, and save them for the next time that we cover this case a little bit more. I'm going to stop it here. I believe I'm really in need of a nap today. I think the fact that I have been sick lately is still kind of getting to me. So I'm going to take a bit of a nap and I am going to come back um, with a vengeance. I don't know if I'll be on tomorrow. My husband and I are going to get my leg looked at from the car accident. Um, as I'm still having issues with it. I was in a car accident, for those of you who don't know, at the end of September, while nobody else that was in the car with me or in the other car were injured. I was injured in my leg, and I was unable to be weight bearing for several weeks. Um, and it wasn't until, oh God, well into October that I was able to be weight bearing and not need crutches and things like that. And since then, I have still been having issues with my leg. Um, to where, um, like the swelling still hasn't really gone down. I am having a part of my leg that's starting to kind of cave in on itself, almost as if there was an infection. I've had a similar thing before happen um, in my finger, and by the time the doctors realized it, I had been on two different antibiotics, and the infection had been able to spread within a millimeter of my bone, and I almost lost my finger. So I am trying very hard to not have the same thing happen again. Um, and yes, so I don't know if I'll be on tomorrow. It depends on how early we get out of the hospital, and also what my husband and I decide to do for family night after that. Um, Otherwise, I will be on like normal earlier in the day on Wednesday, while the kids are at school. And I will probably hop on Friday as well. Now that I am back to driving, Thursdays will be a little more difficult, just because I do pick up the kids from after school at 6 and from um, like 3:30, 4 o'clock to right before 6, I am sitting in the car at the school waiting on the kids, just because it doesn't make sense to drive back to my house to have to turn around by the time I get through traffic and go right back to the school. If you guys want, I can start doing like um, question and answer sessions. Sorry, I didn't mean to cough in everybody's ear. I tried to click the mute on my mic and it didn't click. I was just off of the microphone. But I can do like little question and answer sessions for like a half an hour or so where I come on and um we can talk, you guys can ask me questions, I can answer them. We can talk about some of that week's current true crime cases. We can talk about cases that I'm covering that have had updates or things like that if you want, on Thursdays, but it would just be a quick, short, like half hour, 45 minutes. Um, Not much longer than that on Thursdays while I'm waiting for the kids. Um, it is up to you guys. Let me know in the comments if you guys want to do that on Thursdays. I will be more than happy to hop on and talk to everybody on Thursdays for a little bit. Um, Otherwise, it looks like for right now, the majority of my times that I will be on will be Monday, mostly Tuesdays during the day if my husband and I aren't doing something, Friday, Saturday, and Sundays. I hope everybody has a great rest of your day. I'm sorry that this was a shorter live, but I did have a doctor's appointment today and it kind of made me super tired. It was a slightly stressful appointment, even though it wasn't meant to be. But yes, thank you everybody, and I hope you all have a good rest of your evening.